presentation now with Dr. Gino Yu, all about transformational music and how there might be a different approach to our music in this region. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me here. This is really a wonderful event. This is not my normal venue, but the previous talk that just happened from Universal, Sandy, in many ways I'm saying the same thing in terms of the timelessness of what we're talking about. In other ways, I'm talking about kind of the opposite of it, rather than looking at the finances and advertising and monetization, which is important. I'm also looking at kind of what it is and what it means in a deeper sense. But then with that, and if you realize that, there are bigger monetary opportunities to look at and to explore. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I'm an academic, I'm a professor at a university, and next slide, please. And although I have a background in music, I do musical theater. One of your guests from last year, Jean-Michel Jarre, was the whole reason I got into electronic music and everything. I've been in digital entertainment for about 30 years, but the last 10 years I focus in the area of consciousness studies. And so this is kind of a new venue for me. So I do research in consciousness, and that's understanding the relationship between the mind and the body. So physically, we're all here at the W in this room, but in this conversation, we seem to be somewhere as well. And so if I mention the lionfish thing that Singapore is known for, and if you know what I mean, are there certain neurons in my brain that are wired like yours? Just like there's a relationship between software and hardware in a computer, there seems to be a relationship between the mind and the body. And that's what I research. Next slide. And so if you look at this, music has a tremendous impact on how people feel and the emotions and the affect. It synchronizes the affective, perceptual, cognitive motor process, especially when you're dancing. And it does this within an individual physiologically, and it also does it among people too, when you have a group dancing and everything. And it changes brain waves and states of consciousness as well, which is an interesting point. And related to this too is it hits you pre-linguistic. So if you're listening to, I have a saying that if you're having a conversation and there's music, people, when you dance, you really are not thinking. And so there's a difference between acting from presence and acting from thought. And so all of these things make music really interesting, unique. And it's been known historically. So one of the interesting things is that the word for music in Chinese and the word for medicine are very similar. It's just a 草字头 on top of the word for music. And this actually represents the key organs in the body. So from a long time ago in China, they recognized the influences and what music can do to the body and to health. And so again, it influences cognition, motor control, attention, and emotion. Next slide. And if you look at the contemporary, so this is kind of 5,000 years ago China, and if you look at today, a lot of research labs from Harvard, MIT, there's a music and affect center at MIT, and what we're doing here in Hong Kong, or here in Hong Kong as well too, is really looking at how music can be applied for a lot of different areas, from pain management to ADHD, PTSD, immune functions, creativity, athletic performance, et cetera. And so there have been scientific studies in this area. So this is, I'll just go through this real quick. You can take a look. This is a film called Dances of Ecstasy. How many of you seen that? Have any of you seen this film before? So it basically looks at dance and especially the use of trance from different cultures, whether it's from Islam, from the Sufis, to Korea. Actually, Korea has a tradition of trance, to Africa, and all around the world. It's global and timeless. So just like Sandy was mentioning before, that from the 60s, the Beatles, to today, it seems to be the same. Actually, if you look thousands of years ago to today, it's still the same in terms of what music and dance can do to how important it is culturally to the different cultures around the world. And it is global indeed. Next slide. And then if you look at today, this is a film called Electric Awakening, which is basically making the same insight that I'm giving you, that electronics dance music culture today is the globalization of this trance practice that has been happening around the world since the advent of man. And so it's very relevant culturally, globally. And all of this is designed to bring people into to give them an experience, which is what you guys all probably know you're doing. And so it's a worldwide movement. And so if you look at this, it is an emerging culture. You know, we've been talking about the festivals. There have been the music festivals. But if you look at it right now, and the interesting thing about this, there are the big music festivals and concerts, but it's really a lifestyle kind of thing. How many of you have been to Burning Man? Yeah, so a lot of Burning Man. Or these lifestyle festivals that are happening all around the world today, where it's really not about the music per se or the artist. It's about it's a way of life. It's a way of looking at the world, and it's the creative class, if you will. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's happening with this in the emerging culture, for which you DJs here are effectively, and I'll get to it in a second, the shamans of this new period. So next slide. And so the interesting thing here too, and I apologize, I just grabbed this off the internet. It doesn't have some of the events that have been developing that Sandy mentioned before, but it's a global phenomenon. There's a website that has the festivals around the world, and if you see the US, you know, there's tons of stuff here. In Europe, there's tons of stuff here. Developing in South America, in Australia, yes. But if you look at Asia, this whole Asia region, hardly anything, right? You know, we're at an event that's coming up tomorrow, but there are huge opportunities in Asia, as the first speaker, Kevin, also brought up as well, too. Huge opportunities here in Asia. Next slide. And so, but the challenges in Asia, you know, Sandy mentioned death, but the big problem when early Insomniac approached me and we were looking at doing Asia a couple years ago is drugs. You know, there's the death, but it's the drug culture. And, you know, I think here in Singapore, I think they kill you for drugs, right? So there is death, I guess, with drugs. so it is tied together. But the problem is it's tied to drug culture, which doesn't really work very well in Asian cultures as well, too. And there's a lack of talent, infrastructure models, and there's work that's being developed towards that. I'll tell you a little bit of some of the opportunities we see in that space. But the main reason I think it hasn't really hit here, although it's hit in South America and other places, is it's cultural. And there's a fundamental cultural problem that I'd like to address related to this. Next slide. And with this, I like to challenge you, and because of time, and I know we're really low on time, is I usually in talks on innovation in creativity and development, is I challenge people to name one technology developed in Asia over the last 300 years that has made a global impact. So if you think over the last 300 years, there's been the Industrial Revolution, media, the airplane, automobile, et cetera, all of the internet, biotech, et cetera. Name one invention in all of that has made a global impact invented in Asia. Difficult, right? And so the challenge here, and if you look at it, there are like 1 billion people in China, 1 billion people in India. If you add Malaysia, Indonesia, there's like another 1 billion people. It's like half the world's population. And for the last 300 years, what have we been doing, right? And then the challenge for this, too, is why? Why has Asia not been able to innovate? And if the 21st century is supposed to be the Asian century, how are we going to innovate? And how are we going to lead? And so next slide. And so the fundamental difference between East and West is the framing of reality. In a Western framing of reality, this is me, this is not me. I'm going to explore, conquer, discover, and then someone will judge me later on. And you know, that's kind of what reality is. And it's very much a physical journey in the material world. And if you look at the heroes that you have associated, are people that are conquering, discovering, creating, and exploring. The Eastern framing is this is me, but I'm part of this. And I can't really explain who I am without explaining what this is. So it's more holistic, there's a caste system. And the journey, rather than a physical journey, is an inner journey, and it's a spiritual journey. And if you look at the heroes in the East, like Gandhi and the Buddha, et cetera, very, very different. And the framing of reality at a very deep level is completely different. Another thing is that if you look at the cultures that emerge from that, next slide, please. This is a fun thing. I love doing this. Is in Asian culture, and to explore and discover, is Asian parents, and this is a thing that will blow you away. I teach at a university in Hong Kong, and I challenge them for the Chinese or Asian, people that grow up here. I ask them, how many of you have ever, I have students, about 60 students between the age of 24 and 40 every year, and I ask them, how many of you have ever in your entire life heard your mother or father say to you the words, "I love you"? And surprisingly, for the Asians coming from China and none. You've got these people that are like 40 years old that have never in their life heard their mother or father say, "I love you." Right? And so just in the Chinese view is that if I say it, it's not what it means and everything, and but I know they love you. They'll say, I want you to get a degree at Harvard, but they won't say, "I love you." Really simple things around this. But it's these cultural issues of how we bring up and how we, our framing of reality, and set in terms of our mindset that influences how we perceive the world and how we discover, and whether we're brave enough to go explore the world. And so the question here and the culture change is, can we do the best of both worlds? So there's innovation in culture, and then really looking at kind of the Eastern views and the Western, so Western science and philosophy with Eastern practices. And can we really look at developing a new culture that's not just a West-dominated thing, but really leverages the strengths from the East as well, too. And that brings me to, next slide. And so for you guys here, if you look at things, more from a psychology, anthropology perspective, and if you look at myth, any Joseph Campbell fans here? Joseph Campbell mean anything? A couple in the back there? Oh, there are students, of course. And so if you look at it, there are these things called the right-hand path, which are stories and things, where you basically follow the conventions, the practices of the orthodox. And so there's stories around this and mythologies around this. In Singapore is pretty much this. There's a system, hierarchy, and then you work your way, there are rules, and then you follow these rules and you obey these rules, no chewing gum, all this other stuff. And then you kind of develop, and then you grow, you show your expertise, and then you're recognized, and then you achieve. The other side, which is the left-hand path, these people say, they look at the whole system and the way things are structured, and they say, "Fuck you," to the whole thing. And then they go off, "I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to explore, and I'm going to find my own way." And so if you look at all the true artists, among you, you know what I'm talking about. If you look at the entrepreneurs, like, "Hey, no, I'm not going to do this. There's a new way. It's better." If you look at true scientists, and that's this left-hand path, and there are different stories around that. And it's really, we're coming to an age where, because of globalization and because stories conflict and everything, these systems aren't working anymore, and we have to look at processes and approaches for this. Next slide. And so if you look at it, it's looking at the roots of religion and culture. So if you look at it, things start out, with the basic religion. And if you look at all the religious traditions that exist, and religion is important because religion is basically what sets reality. If you look at, I have another slide for this that's coming up that I'll explain this better. Oh, yeah, okay. If you look at it, and so if you look at this, the key thing about this is that all religious traditions are constructed from mythology, the stories, the art, including the music, the art, the symbolism, etc., related to this, and the rituals. And if you take any religious tradition, pick one, take away all of the mythology, take away the art, and take away the rituals, what are you left with? Nothing. They're all defined by the mythology, the art, and the rituals. And the reason why this is important, and the reason why these traditions are important, is if I say this is a white sofa, you know what I mean. But if I say, Peter, right? Peter, I love you. What the hell does that mean? How do I know that my understanding of love is the same as yours? And so science provides a framework for us to communicate things in the objective world. Mythology, art, and rituals provide a semantic framework for us to communicate inner experience. And this is the important part of this, and it's the communication of that in terms of the symbols and the stories, but these things actually relate to physiological states and physiological experiences. And so that's what this kind of thing is all about. So we started with this, and then 5,000 years ago, But if you let time run, we have our modern culture today. And so it's really an exploration into what is reality. And so if you look at it before, what happened was, and this is around the time of Aristotle, there was a split. So the material domain became science, the mental domain became kind of religion and culture. And it's been split like this for quite some time. But the interesting and exciting thing now, and this ties into what Sandy was saying earlier with the rock and roll and all this other stuff, it was still tied in religion and culture. But now, with the latest in neurosciences, interactive media, the quantified self, we can measure all these brainwaves and everything, we can actually study and understand and research this and potentially engineer experiences, especially transformative experiences. And this is where trance, dance, and this music stuff becomes really, really exciting. Next slide. And so if you look at, again, I mentioned Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung. I'm glad that none of you heard this. If you're interested in this, I urge all of you to take a look at this, because you are the modern myth makers and the modern shamans, and you at Universal Music are basically setting what reality is for people in a cultural way, in terms of the memes and the symbols and what they mean, right? And so there are things like psyche and symbol. This is from Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, and the hero's journey of what's going on within story. And if you look at Jung, and this is Jung's work of the self, the shadow, the anima, animus, persona, personae, and the projection of our inner feelings and emotions onto symbols that drive us to act. And then from this, we have our culture, we have society, we have nature, and then we have the transcendent. And to understand this and to engineer based upon this is knowing the bigger picture of what's really going on globally. Next slide. And so the question here is, now that we have an understanding of this, we have at least 100 years of Jung, Campbell, et cetera, of really studying mythology, art, and rituals. The question, with the background in science and understanding neuroscience of what's going on in the mind and the body as we're doing things, can we engineer new mythology and really look at how do we create a culture that works for society today? And so this is engineering, this kind of thing is possible. So if you look at Star Wars as an example, if you read George Lucas's stuff, he was also heavily influenced by Joseph Campbell, took his work in understanding mythology and created Star Wars that it won't die, right? The trailer just came out, 2 weeks ago, and a whole new generation is being awoken to this mythology. And Universal, Sandy, you can make a lot of money doing this as well, just as Joseph Campbell has. And so again, here's Maslow. The interesting thing about this book is its religious values and peak experience. And so it's really understanding the flow state and how do you engineer this and how do you use symbols and create meaning to help facilitate transformation. Next slide. And so here, this is where the science part becomes interesting again. So again, I research consciousness. And so in the realm of the mind, we have stories and ideas. And in the body, we have physiological processes and feelings and emotions. And we know the autonomic nervous system. We know the stress response. We know dopamine. These are all things that can be objective and measured. Although culturally, we may have different worldviews, but the way the physiology works is the same. And these provide objective measures. And so can we understand the relationship of music and art and experience, and can we engineer experiences to facilitate transformative experiences? Now, the exciting thing about this, next slide, is that technology-wise, there are new technologies that are coming up in this. So there are a lot of things like EEG at the consumer level. This is an interesting thing. Subpack, we mentioned before, this is a bass holster where you can actually create a bass experience, a club experience while you're walking for silent discos, et cetera. This is a flicker effect box that will induce an altered state just by changing the way that light is regulated. This is actually me. There's a company called Think. I think there's a guy here, Steve Aoki, that started looking at this. But what this is me looking terrified too, because what this company Think does is they actually run a current straight to your brain. So you put this patch on, it runs a signal through it's basically wiring your brain with the signal to induce a state. And my experience of this, it was pretty interesting. I felt stoned for like 2 days. Which was quite interesting. And for me, it was really funny because, I tried it with a friend, and then, it was quite interesting. We went to sleep, and then we woke up in the morning, we're like, oh shit, I still feel it. Normally with marijuana, I've heard that, that when you wake up, the effects go away. But these things, so the whole thing that we're looking at with this, and the exciting thing for Asia, is can we re-mythologize this electronic dance music culture and really make it about innovation, thinking out of the box, bringing it to the mind-body practices that Asia is known for, and create and engineer these transformative and unity consciousness experiences without the use of drugs. And so, with the understanding of how art and light and sound and motion and crowd dynamics, can we do this and build a whole new culture? And this, we're really talking about the lifestyle that's happening and emerging around the world. Next slide. And so if you look at the approach in Asia, and when you look at this, there are new hardware and software that's coming about. A lot of these companies are in Europe. They have no distribution in Asia. And so one of the things, if you look at Electron, teenage engineering, before when I did music, it was all keyboards, and then it became like Fruity Loops, kind of like video, software editing. Now it's these boxes with knobs and gadgets. And Asians just love things with knobs and gadgets. You don't even need to know music theory, but if you can tweak with stuff, you can create things, which is interesting. And then training, been in discussion with groups like DubSpot. And so can you provide the ammunition, and then can you train them to develop the skills, and then talent development and representation. And so there's emerging talent. I think I had a picture of Jason Swami, who's a DJ in Hong Kong, and then looking at festivals like Zouk Out, Wonder Fruit, et cetera, and then making these music festivals, and then looking at them as a lifestyle thing. And then if you can engineer it with the mythology, the art, and the rituals around it, you have a whole growing ecosystem that, just between you and me, is religion 2.0, which is emerging in a global way. And so it's really defining the culture and really making it about innovation, connecting with myself, finding that connection that's deeper, and then really cultivating somatic awareness. Next slide. And so related to this, we're doing a lot of work in understanding from a scientific perspective, and this is the university hat back on, of really looking at how do we use media, interactive media, and biofeedback, and the engineering of these cultures to facilitate personal transformation and induce awakening. And so this is where things come in. It's not just like an entertainment thing. It is a business, but really where is EDM and where is music in this space in the bigger scope of where humanity is and what's happening in the world today. And arguably, if we can do this and look at helping to facilitate with the right symbols as people go through the process of life with the new technology, we can potentially achieve world peace, and which is what rock and roll and what music has always been about. How do we get people out of thinking and the fear, need, and desire from that and acting from the innate joy of being and realizing the big wonder of life? Thanks.
Thank you, Gino.